All right, I think we have the core group here. So let's go ahead and get started with the updates. Cool. So we have a few Farcaster topics, a couple of Warpcast topics that we want to focus on. Also want to take a few minutes to get feedback from folks, especially people building frames on any particular pain points or things that you're running into. So first item of the day, we'll start with hub reliability. Sanjay is actively working on this now, so I'm going to give the update on his behalf. But at the hub level, so this is not the Warpcast level, but at the pure hub level, we've made a bunch of improvements over the last 10 days that went out with the Farcaster 1.10 horse release that significantly improved the performance of hubs. So what we're seeing, at least at the network level, is from hub A to hub B, messages are propagating pretty quickly and in pretty reasonable timeframes. The one issue we're still tracking down is we have this bursty gossip behavior where occasionally hubs will like spew out 5,000 messages to another hub, and we're still tracking down the root cause of it. As far as where we're at, this isn't causing any issues with hubs that we're seeing, but this is one of those touch points that if the network were to 10x is likely going to become a problem, and so we're focused on fixing that. There's a separate issue, which is the delay to Warpcast, which I have a little further down in the list, which we'll talk about. But at least at the hub-to-hub level, it feels like hubs are running stably, hubs are sending messages to each other in a reasonable amount of time, and all of that's working. So let me, Dan from the Peanut Gallery. Let me pause here and see if anyone running a hub has run into any issues that we're not aware of that we should be working on. Okay, cool. Seems like we're fine. If I missed anyone, feel free to DM me. The second priority for hubs, what we're starting to think about is how do we get 10x from here? And so there are two big bottlenecks that we've sort of discovered. One is we have a lot of CPU-bound processes, particularly in the like figuring out how to merge messages into the existing database and apply all the logic. And we're running into just upper bounds of what a garbage collected language with sort of this shared threading model can do on a CPU. And so Node is starting to run into its boundaries in terms of how fast it can process messages. We can merge about 1,000 messages a second into hubs right now, but we want to be at 10,000 messages a second, and that's just going to start scaling beyond what the Node JavaScript combo can do. So we're rewriting some of the CPU-bound parts into Rust. So we already have some Rust in the code base. We use it for signature verification, and we're expanding this to touch some of the more CPU-sensitive parts and rewriting some of those pieces so they'll actually be able to run a lot faster. That's one train. The second train is our sync algo. So taking a step back, way hubs communicate with each other, two sync mechanisms, gossip and diff sync. The idea being that like by default, everything's gossiped out very, very quickly, and 99% of messages should propagate this way. But if your hub were to go down for some amount of time or gossip were to fail, there's sort of this differential sync process that does a sync and catches up. And that's actually become very slow because the size of the message set has become very large. And so one of the things that we're focusing on is rewriting the sync algorithm to actually be a lot more performant and to fundamentally work very differently from how it does today. So it can prioritize more recent messages and more important data sets, like making sure casts get synced faster than reactions, for example, and things like that. So that's another set of changes we're working on. We'll share some docs, and if anyone has sort of deep performance experience and wants to contribute, we'd always love your help. But Aditya on the team is driving a lot of these efforts. Cool. That's it for updates on hub reliability. Any questions from folks? Cool. All right, I'm going to zigzag a little and talk about Warpcast message delay. So one of the things we've found over the last few days is messages sent by other clients are not showing up in Warpcast on time. And this has been sort of a frustrating bug to track down. We've narrowed it down to there's something about how Warpcast is reading data out of the hub's gRPC clients that is slowing down when there's just a lot of traffic on the network. And so literally, Warpcast, once it gets a message, merges it into its database quickly. The hub gets the message super, super quickly. But there's something happening in that gRPC link between Warpcast and the hub that is causing large delays that we haven't tracked down yet. It's likely going to be something idiosyncratic to our infrastructure or our setup or some way in which we've configured the parameters. So team is working around the clock. I know this is very frustrating for app developers who are trying to push this stuff through. And we are hopeful that we'll have a fix in the next 24 hours. But we don't have a root cause yet. We just have narrowed the area of pain down to where it's most likely happening, and we're going to be working on that. Any questions on that? Okay, cool. All right, I'll zigzag back into the protocol side. We'll talk about frames really quickly. So we have a couple of updates to frames coming soon. The first one, I kind of posted a high-level cast thread about this a little while ago, saying we were exploring transactions within frames. And the model that we are starting to lean towards, and we're doing a little bit of prototyping on, is being able to do transactions where you as the app developer can specify a transaction in the frame, likely in the form of like, this is the contract, these are the methods that you're calling on the contract, these are the parameters, almost as like call data. And then we will pass this along to a wallet of the user's choice. They might have Rainbow or whatever on mobile or MetaMask on desktop, and will allow you to connect to that wallet and execute that transaction. We're still prototyping a bunch of different ways that integration happens. I think Wallet Connect has actually been very buggy on mobile, and so we're trying to figure out how we can get the best possible implementation, because the mobile to mobile link is going to be the most high leverage one to do. Greg had a question on, isn't there an EIP for this? I believe there is. I think the encoding isn't the challenging part. I think it's like 22 something that actually exists. What's actually challenging is the actual press button, have it show up in the other wallet is failing a lot of the time, and for reasons we don't understand. And this doesn't seem to be a Warpcast specific thing. This just generally seems to be the state of mobile to mobile wallet interactions is really crappy. And one of the things that Dan and I want to prioritize is having this feel really, really good. And so we want to figure out what is the integration. And if the current integration just doesn't work, we want to go and like see if we can improve the standard to get something that ensures that people who click a button can actually go execute a transaction. So I think there's two things that we're spiking on right now. The first one is why are things not working sometime, and why are things working at other times? And so to David's point, we literally prototyped this on our team, and on my device, Rainbow works amazing 100% of the time. And on another person's device, Rainbow fails 100% of the time, and MetaMask works perfectly. And so we have all these like weird idiosyncratic things that we're trying to track down. The second thing that we're working on is, what is the right security model? I think the naive approach is a big scary warning that says this could be a dangerous transaction, read carefully before you click the button, which is fine. But something smarter that we could do is actually use the reputation of the domain that's sending the frame, the author of the frame, and a bunch of other things to say, hey, this is someone you follow, a website that you trust, et cetera, et cetera. You might get a softer warning. So we're kicking around a couple of ideas there on like, what should we launch? With the default being scary warning when you're about to go to another wallet and do a transaction. And most wallets have started integrating Blockade or some of these other transaction simulators on their side. Potentially, we'll consider doing something like that on our side as well, to do a pre-scan to see if there's any malicious activity in the transaction before letting the user click on it. Cool. ETA on this, we ballpark 1 to 2 weeks is kind of what we're thinking. A lot of it right now is like getting the prototype to work reliably from a wallet to wallet connection on Warpcast. I think the standards exist. The rough structure of how we want to do this exists. It's just grinding through the details and getting that done. Cool. Any questions on this? All right. Well, once we feel like the prototype is sort of stable, we'll have a spec out with like, hey, here's how we're planning to implement it. And so we'll give folks enough time to integrate with it. We're hopeful that the actual integration is super easy for frame developers. It's just take contract, turn it into some sort of call data, and expose that as a meta tag, and then boom, you just get the experience and you have to do no other work. So it should be ideally just like a 5-minute drop-in integration and everything works.
Maybe just one thing to add here. I think Varun and I are coming from the point of view is that I think a lot of crypto interaction, especially on mobile, is just, oh, this is the way we've done it. This is the standard way of doing stuff. And I think that's completely unacceptable. Like, we are basically going to try to set up a UX standard here for a frame transaction that just feels great. And there still might be a little bit of clunkiness just because of the deep linking component. But I think like if we take an opinionated point of view here, I think we can pull the market forward. in a way that if other wallets start working really well because we say, hey, we're going to do this securely and we're going to do it with good UX, then the rest of the market moves and it actually improves crypto UX across the board.
Jason had a question on transactions with warps as a fast follow. So we actually working on that this week, Jason. I think Horsefacts put out a proposal, a ask for, hey, who wants to integrate with this? And so we are planning to maybe as early as Friday, maybe as late as early next week, have a version where if you have a contract deployed on a chain, you can integrate with Mint with warps. Our basic model for transactions and how we want them to work in a frame is you can specify a transaction in a frame, and the default experience is every client can just convert that into a link to a wallet and let you go execute it on a wallet. And then on Warpcast, if you have the warps and this is something that we are able to execute for you, i.e. we understand the parameters of your contract, we will upgrade it to a Mint with warps. And we're considering using like a standard tool like Reservoir or something that maps all of these so that if you're integrated with one of these things, we can easily go get the call data and just make this work. Mint with warps is always going to have some set of restrictions on it because Warpcast carries the funds and executes the transactions. We'll keep it like small ticket size, so it'll be somewhere in the $5 to $10 mint only range. You're not going to be able to go mint like $1,000 NFT with this. And for those things, we'll fall back to the hey, go use your wallet and your MetaMask and do things like that.
And to add here, I think one thing, people are asking like, oh, can we increase the amount of stuff that you can do with warps? And I think warps are a great, convenient tool. People will have a small balance. They can go mint a simple NFT, maybe take, and actually, importantly, Farcaster related actions, storage, all this other kind of stuff, right? Our vision is actually to get to a place where with these L2s, now we're going to have Solana support on in terms of connected addresses. You can imagine a world where developers are going to actually have a lot of freedom, especially with frames, to use a low cost on-chain option with a cryptocurrency, whether that's ETH or USDC, a user already has in a wallet that they already control. And I think if we push the UX over the next 6 to 12 months, we can get to a really nice place where you're not worried about, do I have a warps balance? It's just like, I have some crypto. I'm able to do it. I can take an action in whatever crypto I want based on what the frame developer is deciding. And I think that is the long-term ecosystem that we want, because frankly, it takes a lot of work off of us and it actually moves it to all of the hard work that all of the scaling and the L2s are happening.
Yeah. There's a question about how are you thinking about using the Warpcast custody address to perform the transactions in the future? So it's a good question. I think our current POV on this is that would be a good user experience in terms of you don't have to jump an application boundary to execute a transaction. But that is a difficult user experience right now, because to build a wallet that supports all of the arbitrary things that you want to do on chain is actually not trivial. Like it's a whole product in and of itself that looks and feels very, very different from what Warpcast looks like today. And at least for now, we don't necessarily want to make the bet that Warpcast is going to go be a wallet. Like we are the social layer and we're happy to kick things out to wallets. And for small transactions, we'll do the Mint with warp thing that make it work. So that's our current POV on how we're building this, which is we don't want to turn the custody address in Warpcast into a wallet where you're like storing your Uniswap, like swap returns and all of that in that wallet.
I think, again, to just add on the Varun side of things here, it's a lack of focus if we actually go down in that direction, because I actually don't think that that's fundamentally what people want. What they want are make it really easy for me to do something from the feed. And so I think the way to solve for that is to try to think about like, what is the smartest way we can take existing infrastructure, the composability of the ecosystem, and kind of make that happen. Because I think that the single best thing that we can continue to be focused on, pushing frames development like is important, is growing users. And like any version of the world where we're going and basically building a bunch of features that already exist in 5 other apps, because that's basically what people are going to expect if they want to make it a primary wallet, doesn't actually grow users like in a meaningful way. I think it's like you want us investing in channels, you want us investing in the actual social features that is making frames as an ecosystem useful because people are using this as a social app.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I'll add is most wallets, like if you look at the modern incarnation of a Coinbase wallet, Rainbow, MetaMask, are actually pretty good. What sucks is the connection layer. It's literally just getting the request from one side to the other side in a safe and reasonable way. And that feels like a very, very solvable problem that doesn't require rebuilding a whole wallet from scratch, which is, I think, what we're focused on. Second question, semi-custodial smart accounts. High level, I think my excitement about custodial wallets, or about like AA wallets and the experience that they unlock has been ticking up in the last few months. I think there's more and more interesting prototypes that are coming out. I don't think it's at a state where we can go and launch something today and like build all this infrastructure from scratch that works. But it's starting to feel like in somewhere in the next 3 to 6 months, there will be an interesting prototype, and we will come and revisit what that means for the Wallet Connect architecture. Cool. Let me see if there's any other questions here that I missed. Nope. Okay, I think that's what chain transactions will TX with Warps be available? So it's going to be on Zora and Base, and we will probably support Optimism very soon after as well. Maybe next week, if not this week. Sweet. Next up, Frame Validator. So we're shipping some improvements to our Frame Validator, just to make it easier for people to debug frames. It should go out sometime today, and it's actually going to give you a little more timeline data, better feedback when frame tags aren't structured very well, et cetera, et cetera. Our POV on the Frame Validator, by the way, is I think, stepping back, I think there's actually two kinds of tools that people need. One set of tools are local frame debugging tools, which are things like frames.js and others are building, which is like, hey, I've got my dev cycle. I want this to work really, really well. I want to understand why something's not working and iterate. The frame validator we're building is not the right tool for that because that's hosted on our server. It's not in your local environment, et cetera. You can use it. You can kind of ngrok into it and do whatever you want, but it is less ergonomic than having something locally. But the reason we think the frame validator on Warpcast is important is because you want to do the smoke test to finally saying, what does Warpcast crawler actually see when I go and post this on the application? And there's always going to be idiosyncrasies between how your local debugger visualizes something and how our feed visualizes something. And so we sort of think of these as like a two-tier system where you will start with a local debugger, build your thing, and then when you kind of get it over the finish line, you'll throw it into Warpcast and see how it's working, and then you'll go and launch your frame. And I think right now there's no way to sort of build both of those into one tool because one is obviously highly dependent on how Warpcast production backend works, and the other can sort of just work off of the spec. So that's been our mental model on how frame development is working. Would love to hear from the community if you're using these tools in a different way or you're finding different use cases that are valuable for you. And that's kind of how we're going to plan developing this going forward. Okay, there will be a cast announcement when the new frame validator is live, and y'all can go play around with it. Hopefully a bunch of improvements that makes debugging stuff a lot simpler. We also have this change log now, so we've actually been tracking all of the changes to frames here line by line, so you can actually go back and see the history of how the spec has changed. Our POV on the frame spec right now is we are moving quickly, but we are only adding fully backwards compatible changes. So anything we add is sort of additive right now. Nothing will change or break an existing frame as much as we can avoid that as possible. At some point, we will lock this version and say, hey, this is like version 1. We're doing date version. So we'll say like, this is the version of Feb 15th. We're going to now launch a new version in March, and that may have breaking changes. And so, there's a V1 and V2, and older frames will render for a couple of months, but everyone needs to upgrade to the new frames. We need to figure out what that schedule is. For now, I think for the next month, we're pretty confident that we will only be shipping fully backwards compatible changes. And when there have been some feature requests from folks like JSON support for returning frames and things like that, which we'll consider once we start planning for like a breaking change. Cool. And then two other topics we want to talk about on the protocol side. First one is Salana verifications. So the code for this has actually been ready to go for like a week. We've held back on shipping this largely because we wanted to get all the stability and developer issues under control first. Looks like we might be able to launch this soon, like tomorrow if we're able to get over all the developer issues, or potentially as early as next week. So we're generally feeling bullish about launching this, and it's going to be a fairly straightforward verification type that you can sign from a Solana wallet, and it just works exactly as an Ethereum address and is one more address or a set of addresses that you can now add into your address book from Solana chains. Obviously, this unlocks a bunch of stuff for frame developers who want to build things where you mint things on Solana, because now you have the user Solana connected wallet that you can say, oh, this is the user's sort of primary address on Solana. Cool. There's a question on, is there a timeline for frame support in DCs? Dan, I know you guys were talking about that one. Did you want to take that?
Yeah, so I would be curious, we don't necessarily have to do it right now, but to the degree that people send me a DC and just give me an example of a use case, I'd love to understand that. I think it's the kind of thing where, yes, does it make it marginally better that I could just send a link, we should render casts in DCs, we have that data, and then potentially frames. But what I'm trying to understand is what is a use case that you wouldn't necessarily do publicly that you would do privately in a frame in a world where we don't have APIs for sending DCs, right? So in a world where we said, hey, if you follow me, I now have a developer API where I can automatically shoot you a DC with a custom frame or something like that. I can understand that. But so when people are asking for frames and DCs, what they might be actually asking for is no, I want a programmatic way to be able to send a DC. So if you can just follow up with me, my DCs are open. So send me a DC. Clearly you'll be interested if you want frames and DCs, but that would be great.
Cool. Catching up on the messages in the chat. Okay, I don't think there's any new questions. Second one, OP Mainnet Pause. So last night, OP Mainnet had a scheduled withdrawal lock, which was supposed to largely only affect withdrawals to mainnet. So transactions on OP mainnet were supposed to go fine. During the sort of test phase, they ran into some issues where the blocks actually started reorging. And so what this roughly means is you produce a block, you say that hey, these are the transactions that got included, which might include a Farcaster registration. And then when a reorg happens, that block gets blown away and rebuilt, and the rebuilt block may or may not include that transaction. If that happens, if a Farcaster transaction gets kicked out during a reorg, it could lead to some sync issues on hubs where a certain ID or a certain transfer that happened in that exact block doesn't sync correctly because hub A and hub B is a different state of the world, and we might actually have to push out a fix for hubs to ignore the old block hash and ingest the new block hash to make everything work. Fortunately, last night that didn't happen. As soon as we saw things were going awry, we shut down and paused the contracts to basically prevent any on-chain actions from happening and prevent any users from getting into a bad state. And we resumed it this morning now that OP mainnet is back online. A couple of good learnings from this whole process. One is we should probably have 30 minutes and make sure that all the APIs and all parts of the ecosystem are hardened to handle it. And we announce this early on, just so that when we have an emergency, everything is actually ready to go and nobody's breaking when this happens. The second thing is we're also thinking about how we can make hubs potentially more resilient to reorg. So even if we don't cap a matter of hours instead of days, so maybe you get reorged and your account is locked up for an hour because you tried to do some very specific transfer at that time. Again, it's exceptionally rare, right? It should only affect accounts that are trying to recover or transfer or register during that time period. But we'd like to make hubs a little more resilient, and so we're going to do a little bit of investigation into that. If there are any other unintended side effects of this or anything that broke when we paused the contracts, please let us know. We had to rush pretty quickly on this. There wasn't a lot of time for comms because this was sort of an unexpected breakage from our POV as well. Landed pretty safe. So, everything's back. Registrations are working 100% back to normal now. Okay, cool. Question on what happens if a reorg invalidates a signer. The ideal behavior should be that if a reorg invalidates a signer, the signer is no longer active. It's just projected and it will have to be re-added again by the user. What could end up happening if the hubs are not correctly syncing on the state of the chain, because the state of the chain is diverging, is one hub might think it's added and another hub might think it's not added. And so one hub continues accepting messages for the user and the other doesn't, until at some point they reconcile and realize, oh, this is actually not in the chain, and drops that entire block. Cool. What's the rationale for the 256 kilobyte limit, and could this not be increased for subsequent responses? Which parameter is this referring to, Stefan? Data URI images. So data URIs, the challenge with data URIs in our current infrastructure and Warpcast is like we basically cache the entire frame content in an in-memory cache, basically Redis, and we serve it down to users. And we use CDNs like Cloudflare to actually cache the images and serve those down to users. So what's worked really well is taking large images, putting them on Cloudflare, letting them resize, replay, whatever, and send it down, and storing like very minimal frame metadata in our database. What happened when we allowed large-sized URIs is one, people started sticking 1 megabyte, 2 megabyte images in there, and they start propagating in our caches. We don't actually have a good layer to take a data URI, translate it to an image, put it in Cloudflare, and then send it back down. And I suspect this is actually going to be a problem for anyone building a Farcaster app. You don't want to be storing and caching all of these very large data URIs. And so until we figure out a better system for how we can safely handle large data URIs, we wanted to restrict the size down to 256 KB. Now, could we be at 512 KB instead of 256? Probably, but we'd be curious to understand what your requirements are, what size of images you're sending, and then maybe we can figure out a path to bumping that number up, especially working with some of the other folks building apps to make sure that that works for them too. Cool. Lots more chats, so I'll try to catch up and see if there's any interesting questions. Lester reports, FYI, still getting signer revoke message, failed to disconnect app. I'm assuming this is within Warpcast. We'll take a quick look at this right after this call and see if anything's still broken on our side. Frames ask, would be great to have a standard for including Warpcast specific actions. Yes, actually agreed. We want to have sort of like, call it like Farcaster deep links, where you don't need an external redirect to go through, and each app can interpret it to do whatever they want. I think it's a great suggestion. We will prioritize it once we're done with transactions. Cool. If there's no other questions on that, and apologies if I missed something in the chat, feel free to resurface it. We will keep rolling. There's a UIUX question. Is a solution being worked on for DC not loading and having to constantly refresh for new messages? Dan, did you want to take this one?
Yes, we have a lot of priorities, and one of them is to improve the React cache and validation of how we do everything in DC, especially on web. Just, priorities.
Yeah, Ian, answer to your second question is also yes, we wanted that feature to be able to turn on for channels where you have like a custom like icon that you can have for your like button. But again, it's just been priorities this week. So on our list, cool.
Let me, so I have if you're running a channel and you're not in the host, channel host chat, please send me a DC. I'm happy to send you the link. People are offering a lot of good feedback there in terms of like what they want from channels. I think the single highest priority item for channels is to solve the quality issue on the network, right? So most users don't see this, but channel hosts definitely get hit with this, because I think what you have is you have a lot of new people who show up. They don't necessarily know norms, rules. And I actually think getting to a place where, at least from Warpcast standpoint, we know that there are like, here are the 3 things that we actually do for new users that help guide them into higher quality engagement in a channel. Or if they choose not to do higher quality engagement, we can just not show it. And I think before adding additional features to channels, I want to be able to solve for that, because the biggest channels are feeling this pain. And I think, not solving for that is like, kind of not being focused on the most acute problem, versus there's a bunch of stuff that I think, especially with all the growth now, that I'm much more excited to revisit. Token gating, I think, being one of the things that people have brought up. For those who are really OGs, we had it. No one ever used it when we were back on the desktop app, but I think we're at a place now where that could actually be a really powerful primitive for channel hosts to decide if they want their channel.
Cool. Mint with warps. We sort of exactly this topic earlier, so I don't think there's anything much to add, but I'll just recap. Anyone joined late. We're supporting Mint with warps on Zora. We want to launch something soonish, so call it in by tomorrow / early next week, depending on how the integration goes. And if you have a marketplace, feedback from a lot of folks. If you haven't talked to us, just DM me and I will make a group chat and we will figure out how to get you integrated so that you can be supported on day one. It is for now manual integration, but it's a fairly simple manual integration. So we just need a couple things on your side and a couple things on our side, and the whole flow should generate. Okay, cool. That's the end of our agenda. There's a couple more like narrow questions on Hubble and other things. I'll just address this as we go, but if folks generally want to drop off, feel free to. I think we've covered the main agenda items. So question from Matt, a few questions regarding Hubble. In order to get around an issue with the replicator breaking down with foreign key constraints, we removed some constraints. What are the ramifications of this? And also something about Hubble rate limiting gRPC connections. Matt, I think so Sanjay's, who's not on the call today, is actually working on this and has been planning to go back and revisit some of the replicator issues. If there's a ticket open for this already, I know there's one on the foreign key constraints. If this is the same issue, it's on our radar and we're going to do it. If you think this is a fundamentally different issue, if you wouldn't mind opening a GitHub ticket and assigning it to me or Sanjay, we're happy to prioritize these two issues once we've worked through the current hub stability issues that we're dealing with gossip and on the Warpcast side. Cool. Visibility issues on Warpcast posts are not visible in other channels for a brand new account. Do you want to DM us the account that you're seeing? And we can take a quick look. You can just DC me. And if I don't follow you yet, and just because I don't know what your Warpcast handle is, just feel free to post and tag me, and I will take a look at that. Have there been thoughts around adding Mint URI examples to the frame docs page frame validator? I think we have one for the Horsefacts Mint example, if I'm not mistaken, Dylan. Or were you asking about something else?
I guess I was just saying it might be helpful to have it on the docs.farcaster page because, for example, on the developer embeds where it shows the Cape 10 URI examples, those start with chain : / but that is truncated for the frames Mint URI. And so just wondering if it may be helpful to like have some sort of note there because some developers have like run into those issues.
Got it. Cool. I went through last weekend and added the link in a bunch of places. I may have missed one or two pages. So if you want to DM me the specific page, or if you even want to make a pull request, either one's fine. Happy to go and fix this. I might have just missed a page where this needs to be called out.
Okay, got it. I'll do that. Thanks.
Last question from Manan. Have you made any changes or upgrades to the spam problem? Dan, I know you answered it in chat. Do you want to answer it live, or did that sort of cover the question?
Yeah. So basically, I think we're still in the mode of like we're trying to actually get to a stable place from a quality standpoint, and I think we're experimenting with a bunch of different things. The system today is mostly we get user signals. It's like Varun or myself label the accounts, and so that is where we are. It's not like we're doing less like broad net of just kind of like automated signals because that can actually be easily gamed. That there are false positives. We'll still have some false positives, and like we usually work to correct that. People reach out of band. But I think if I was to guess, like we're probably 1 to 2 weeks away where I can actually say, okay, it feels like quality is actually in a pretty decent place, and we can actually rotate onto both new channel features, but also more importantly, what we've kind of learned from that, like informing potentially the set of tools that we give to channel hosts as it relates to potentially just gating their channels to just like focus on quality. I think we're still very much in iteration mode there, but I think like the basic example, we now have hide quietly, we have warn and hide, and then we have ban from channel, which again are Warpcast only features that I think we have confidence that over the course of this year, as we move what I would call channels V2, right? Like the stuff that we've been really driving from a Warpcast standpoint, so it's permissionless channel creation, will end up at the protocol level. There's a bunch of non-trivial stuff to solve for there, right? Like the moment you move bans to, kind of like hubs, then obviously they're public. Basically a ban that's public is going to create a lot of animosity from people. Like not everyone, but like there are going to be people who just get really aggro. And so I think that there's going to be a bunch of stuff that we need to think through, because ultimately if being a channel host turns into too much of a job and not enough fun, people won't want to do it. And so I think that's where we have to start from. And so design the kind of thing in a centralized way, figure it out, and then work on the hard problems to figure out like what's the right way to decentralize this.
Cool. A few more questions that have come up since. What's the right comms for people who want to manage clients, edit names, hide posts from all clients? So long-term plan for channels is we want to actually move them to a decentralized state where all of this is managed either on-chain or on hubs, and this can all be done well. We're getting increasing conviction the channels are here to stay for a long time, and so we're starting to like think about what steps we're going to take in that direction. So this is sort of under the umbrella of that. Specifically, what we're going to do as a next step is I think we're going to open up a couple of APIs, first focusing on channel reads, so that you can at least for now, until we deploy it on chain and on hubs, you can at least read all the channel data you care about on Warpcast. And then I think we sort of have a decision we'll make on like, are we just going to go and decentralize this thing so you can directly update it on hubs? Or are we going to offer a temporary write API because the decentralization is going to take 1 to 2 months if we want to open this up? So let us get to the end of the read APIs, which I think we've been talking to Naynar and some other folks about what APIs they would want. And once we get those ships, we can turn around and talk about write APIs. But in terms of a timeline perspective, I would say writing is at least a month away, if not a little bit longer, if not quite a bit longer in terms of where we get to. Dan, does that sound right with your timelines?
Yeah, I think that the big thing here is one, all of the channel revenue that is coming in via warps, right? It's $25, 2,500 warps going into, like, that is money that will go to the protocol. So we get to a level of conviction to put it in from a decentralized standpoint. All of that goes into the protocol. If for whatever reason, very some chance we just say, hey, channels is too confusing, like we're going to get rid of channels. I don't think that that's going to be the case. We would just refund the warps. So the idea is like we are temporarily holding those warps from a kind of like, you know, on the benefit of the protocol, but it allows us to keep moving fast and actually make the right product decision. So I actually think it's important because that's actually a meaningful chunk of revenue for the protocol in the long run. And that, you know, if $25 is the right price, that actually is, you know, we have 2,000 plus channels now. Like that's all revenue that accrues to the protocol. And then I think going back to this idea of a decentralized primitive, my sense is that some core component of the channel will be on chain. Which makes it more composable and things like that. We have yet to like really map that out. Like I think we're really focused on how do we make channels default have quality and not make it too much work for hosts. That's actually the hard problem. And once we've figured that out and people are really excited about channels and growing their channels, then I actually think the work to kind of decentralize it in the same way that we approached moving the core part of the network last year to hubs, right? And I think that the thing to remember, all the casts on channels are on chain, right? Like, or not on chain, but on hubs. So is the core content is there. It's just that there are a set of new features that we have, like follows, that we have yet to decentralize. We will decentralize once we get to the kind of right shape of the feature.
Cool. Great. I know we're almost at time. There are actually been a few more questions on this. Let me just zoom through this. Any plan for opening up API for DMs? We talked about this in the last meeting. I'll bring this up again. Long answer, we want to open up DMs and actually make them satisfy 2 properties into an encrypted and open so that other clients can integrate. We believe this is actually a very difficult task. We've spent a lot of time building this stuff, and so we want to go and do this correctly and in a way that is both secure and scalable. And we think that realistically, the earliest that we would have something like this is 2025. So actively working on thinking about ways we can do this, but it is at least a year out before we'll be able to have something that everyone will be able to integrate with. Dan, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, again, I guess it goes back to the same thing. It would be nice if we did this, but I think anything we're spending in terms of decentralization is at the expense of user growth for the protocol. And so I think that we need to balance this, right? And I think with the influx of new people, great. I think our conviction on channels, for example, has increased in terms of something that needs to be in the protocol sooner. I don't think we're there for DMs yet. Yes, people use DMs, but actually as a percentage of the user base of Warpcast, it's actually not that large in the scheme of things relative to channels. So like, let's focus on the things that people are using and get any of that into the protocol. And then I think we work down the list of things that, you know, need to be there. But like the long-term aspiration, and just to make sure this is super clear, there is no like surprise, like Warpcast has these set of features that we want to use to keep people using Warpcast. We are doing a pragmatic version of how we're building this. And it seems to be working in the sense that, you know, I said this in December and I said this at the beginning of January, like we seem to have a decent amount of user growth. That's good. Like, I think the number one thing that you want the core team focused on is, outside of stability of the core protocol, user growth. And so it's just like focus on the user growth, get us to a place where there are 500,000 daily active users of the protocol or 5 million daily active users of the protocol. and we will deliver the decentralization stuff within a reasonable amount of time, like just like we have over the last 3 years. I can answer the question about the protocol revenue. We're not going to do anything with it. So first of all, Warpcast has to pay taxes on this. So we have to kind of actually out of our budget, which is fine. We'll leave the money in the treasury, but like off our balance sheet, we have to pay taxes. That's just like the legal requirement. There's a second component where I think we need to think about long-term as this gets larger. It's like, how do you manage this in a world where you don't just have Warpcast as the primary kind of like entity like that is working on this protocol. And so I think premature decision-making, like for some short-term thing, I think that's a bad decision. And so what I'd say here is just like, be patient with it. Like it's not going anywhere. You can see it in the treasury contract, and it's just like, keep moving, right? Like the goal is 500,000 DAO, 5 million DAO. Don't like, I think, go off on side quests when the thing that we should be focused on is overall protocol growth.
Yeah. One thing I'll add here is like, when you see like a protocol treasury set up with like a very large thing, it's usually a large token sale that generated like tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. People spending months and hundreds of thousands of dollars to set up legal entities and all of this stuff to be able to do this in a tax-free way, and then going and doing some stuff with the protocol. If we went and did that right now with the, call it $700,000 that we have in the protocol treasury, we would waste months of time on it, and we would also deplete like half the treasury just to set up the structures to distribute money, which we think is a colossal waste of the money that's in the protocol right now. And so what we're doing right now, which Dan actually proposed and suggested, is like, Warpcast is just paying the taxes on it and saying, hey, we're not doing this as a foundation. We will just eat the cost for this and keep putting money in the treasury. We'll pay for the taxes off our balance sheet. And at some point, we'll set up the foundation and just let the protocol take all the money, even though Warpcast has paid the taxes. And that way we will have a fund to do something with in the future. But we think that going and trying to split like $200,000 in some way right now and wasting a bunch of time on it is not the most high leverage thing we can be doing to make Farcaster successful.
Let me put it another way. If we want to go out and do the rigmarole that everyone else does, first they do a bunch of stuff to just avoid taxes, which that tends to be, for US-based companies, the government doesn't like that. So in our version, we're going to be really conservative here, and we're going to be paying it from our own, equity dollar balance sheet. Second thing, any of this I have to go do. That is less time me spent on user growth. So like, it's like, do we go play around with this game and like deal with lawyers and talk to Deloitte and all these other people? Or do I focus on growing the protocol so that we have 5 million daily active users? Like, to me, it's a very clear answer, but I could be convinced otherwise if there was a groundswell of people reaching out to me saying that this is the highest use of your time.
Yep. Cool. I know we're at time right now, so we'll pause here. Good discussions today. Thanks for all the feedback. This has all been very helpful. If we didn't get to cover a topic that mattered to you, you can always DM me or tag me on Warpcast and we can chat async, or we can bring this up in the next protocol meeting. Thanks everyone for coming, and see y'all in 2 weeks.